for your patience, everybody. These are like real life moments where you come in and you're trying to be on time. It's kind of like getting your kid out the door in the morning. Or raise your hand if you're here and you have grandkids. There's oftentimes grandparents in the room. Raise your hand if you have adult children. Sometimes that's different, right? Okay, good, thank you. There's something for everybody here today. We intentionally titled this Empowered Parenting. So I want you to take a moment and think back to that first moment where you were raising a child and you felt despair. Right? I know, you don't even have to raise your hand. I'm just making assumptions, friends. I'm going to weave into today's 1 hour talk the story about when I first felt personal despair, but I want to get really practical with you first. So I'm going to save that story a little bit and give you the professional stuff. So if you come back with me to 2004, I just graduated with my master's degree, and I was on a fast track doing PSEO, going through college. I was 22 years old when they handed me the diploma with my master's degree. And I moved out to Southern California to work at this autism school. Kids were ages 3 to 22, and the thing that was leading me was like John Lennon and the Beatles, all you need is love. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and within months, I remember this really strong contrast feeling of having my door, and it's like 4 months into my job, hand on the doorknob of the 3rd grade classroom. It was my job to transition children to teach them social skills. Eye contact, how to make friends, use your words rather than acting it out. And as I stood there about to get 9-year-old Charlie, I was filled with dread. Charlie was the child who, when I transitioned him from the classroom twice a week, would typically have a meltdown 10 steps from my office. So I used all my powers of persuasion to get him out of his chair, navigate the hallway without having any disruptions to everybody else. And as we're 15 steps away, my hope is building. And then we get to 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, and it happens. Charlie drops to the floor, kicking and screaming those things. You never want to hear a child scream at you in public. And as it happens, I look at him, I look around me, it doesn't go away. So I'm noticing teachers peering out of the cafeteria and their doors. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, what do I do here? I'm totally lost. I should know better than the average person how to navigate this exact situation. And I didn't. And I thought, well, okay, let me just run through my Rolodex, and maybe you felt this before. Should I do the thing that my parents taught me? Well, you gotta obey me, I have your best interest at heart, and I should physically move him to the office? No, maybe I should do what we now call gentle parenting. It wasn't called that 20 years ago. I got it. Maybe I should sit down on the floor next to him and wait till the feelings pass. And I was or maybe, I'm actually really good friends with Kathy, who did our keynote this morning. We talk on the phone once a week. And we always laugh about this because I'm well, maybe I should get that breathing ball where you take a deep breath and it's visual. Let me go get that from my office. But you know what happened to me because I didn't know how to use it the way Kathy and people who do proactive mindfulness strategies do? When I would bring that ball, you know what Charlie would do with it, right? Yeah, throw it at me. So I'm I don't know what to do here. So I'm having this moment of frustration, and I could feel what my dad said raising myself and my 4 siblings often when he was raising us, which was I could feel my blood boiling. And I was hold it together, hold it together. And ultimately, I felt the sweat roll down my back, and I thought, I can't. So I bribed Charlie, and I brought him back to his classroom, and he didn't disrupt everybody. I used those powers of getting him back in the classroom. But when I had to go back to my office and do that long walk of shame, I felt helpless. And I was losing my hope. And I thought, I wish all you needed was love. I think there's love and something else. So, raise your hand if you wish it was just all about love with your kids, because you might have enough of that, right? So I put my head in my hands, I turned the light off in my office, and I'm sitting there. And I'm thinking some of these things that I've also now thought as a parent. I have a 4-year-old at home, so maybe you felt this or thought this, where I'm what did I sign up for? This isn't what I was expecting. Wait, I have to do this forever? And thank goodness, in that wrestling moment, I also heard my mom Cheryl's voice in my head. And her voice said, every child has gifts. You can learn to draw them out. Oh, that sounded so hard. And then I hear it again. Every child has gifts. You can learn to draw them out. So what happened was I started on this journey of understanding how exactly do we draw out children's gifts. And I studied a lot of the work from Dr. Daniel Siegel, author of Whole Brain Child, with my friends who were play therapists, and they talked about connecting with kids as a natural vehicle for learning, like their natural interests. I studied with the occupational therapists who were really specialized in sensory processing disorder. And they were like, put the kid on a scooter board. I'm like, I'm supposed to work on social skills. And they're like, do this first. It will help him access language. And I'm like, what? How does all of this work? But it piqued my interest in like a really holistic approach to helping to calm challenging behaviors. And so over the years, the 7 years that I practiced as a speech language pathologist, I created a curriculum called the Mad to Glad Blueprint. Now, you might think, hearing that background, that I was trying to shift kids from mad to glad. I mean, yeah. I became a parent coach in 2012, a year after I started my business. And so I was like, yeah, shift parents from mad to glad. But also, it was about me as a person working with a child. Like, how do I shift myself from this childhood, blood is boiling rage? I don't even know what to do with this. So the root of what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to teach you 3 strategies. Ultimately, the curriculum I've created, and you have a handout of this, are the 8 pillars of parenting. I'm going to talk about the top 3 starting places whenever you have a child, teenager, or young adult with challenging behaviors, so that you can reduce conflict, increase ease, and even collaboration. Now, over, 20 years now, I've worked with over 1,000 families. So if you say, oh, but my child is unique because, I know that's true, but I'm also going to highlight some things that are probably across the board because it's child development and brain science. So I'm considering lots of identities and genders and generations and cultures and socioeconomic status and all these things, but it's still going to be relevant to you here today. So when we talk about these 3 things, well, let's just dive right in. And you already got your QR code for the handout. So our starting point when we're talking about 3 things to calm challenging behavior, number 1 is I want you to understand the brain science because that's truly going to help you feel empowered and understand how these tools are going to apply to your situation. So we're told by Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is the leading neuroscientist from UCLA, maybe still is, he has come up with this flip your lid hand model. If you've ever seen your kid like practice, like, okay, get your prefrontal cortex and have control. Your amygdala shouldn't be running the show. Like, he's developed this model, and so I created graphics to help us understand this better, to know that there's 2 segments of the brain you really want to understand if you're looking for more peace at home. So one is the downstairs brain, fight, flight, or freeze. So popcorn, what have you heard about fight, flight, or freeze? Limbic brain, uh-huh. What else? Response to threat. Oh, thank you, Siri. Thank you, phone. And the other thing, understood. So with downstairs brain, ultimately what's happening is it's our survival mechanism, and it's really early developing in the womb as a fetus. So this is responsible for keeping you safe. If a bear was chasing me in the woods, I would go into fight mode, I would go into flee mode, or I would go into freeze mode. And my response to the situation with Charlie, where my sweat dripped down my back and I was paralyzed and felt helpless, is more of a freeze response. Now, for those of you advanced brain science people, you also know about fawn mode, which is just like put on a smile and acquiesce. I won't talk about that so much today. Most people who come to my talks have kids with really strong fight behavior. Fight behavior, so externalized behavior is what the mental health clinician might call it. Or you see some of this anxiety behavior or depressive behavior where kids are getting withdrawn. So that's either like running away, get away, don't know what to do, shut down, not really able to function really super well. So we want to understand this in relationship to the upstairs brain because the upstairs brain is responsible for these other 3 skills. And most of us as adults default into upstairs brain skills in this moment. So if I walk back to Charlie melting down here, what I would literally do after 6 years of university education is I would try problem solving. And I was tasked to do that. Charlie, what could you do instead of yelling, I hate you? You know that doesn't work in the moment. Or classically, 20 years ago, I'm sure this has shifted in the autism world, but I'd be like, look at me, check my eyes, thinking if I could just get his attention, then it would like sink in what I was saying. Does anybody do that with their toddlers? Like, look at me, mommy is talking. Like I found myself doing that a couple years ago too. Pay attention, here I am, trying to bring your kid's brain online, as well as those behavioral management tools. So if your kid has been taught the Take 5 breathing, or they do magical fairies, or whatever they're calling in, they've got some sort of fidget or soothing device on their body. We know that when the fight or flight stress system is activated, that like behavioral management, recognizing what to do, the occupational therapist would say you can't access it. And so this became really important information for me, who likes to really simplify things, to understand, oh, okay, got it. So when Charlie's melting down, I'm going to think about this as fire in his brain, because the neurochemistry is adrenaline and cortisol. It doesn't last a minute or 10 minutes. It lasts 12 to 18 to 24 hours from one incidence. So if he's got fire in his brain and I'm trying to use upstairs skills and I know better, I'm the person who can change something here. Can Charlie change something? Not quickly. He's going to need a lot of practice to develop behavioral management tools, which is like the work of what we're doing with our kids in childhood, right? So then the other thing that happens is the question comes up, well, how do I know if my kid has fire in the brain? Well, because I have now developed a working partnership with Fraser that works with 10,000 families a year that have neurodiversity. I've certified mental health professionals at Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health. Agencies are looking for a parenting academy. And so they're like, well, how does this apply to a kid with ADHD or autism or a mental health diagnosis or oppositional defiant disorder or gifted, like all of these things. And ultimately what I now say is, you're raising a child with more fire in the brain because there's intensity. So I just call them intense brain kids. So I say, you have an intense brain kid if the majority of the time they're like controlling and demanding. Now I know we're not supposed to compare our children. And like my child's pretty controlling and strong-willed, but additionally there are normal like child developmental phases where that's really true. 2 years old, 3 years old. If you're like, my kid's an intense brain kid and he's 3 years old. Yeah, because they're 3, so that makes sense to me. But the other thing is that the triggers can be confusing. So you might have a 9-year-old or a 17-year-old at home, and you're drinking your coffee and having your banana for breakfast, and they come in the room and they wanted the banana, and you're like, you haven't had a banana in 6 months, and then they escalate. So you can't stay ahead of the triggers, or some of us know about the things that bother them. Your kid has to take their socks on and off 5 times in the morning in order to get it just right. There's certain texture things or sound or light things. So the triggers can be confusing. And then we know that their emotional responses or behavior reactions are pretty intense. They're pretty high. There are some school, I don't even know what you call it, trainings in schools that talk about like, is this a big problem or is this a small problem? Well, for intense brain kids, things feel like big problems to them. So I'm always really careful about that language. And if what happens behind closed doors in your family environment is you match their intensity. Is your child the pleaser temperament that just goes, okay, and they curl their toes in the carpet and move on? No, your child is going to escalate, and this is where power struggles and battles come in. So what I'm here to tell you today are a couple of things that help you refrain from like escalating the power struggle, because if you're like me, growing up in the 1980s or any time earlier, it's pretty likely that you were raised in an environment where a caregiver was an authoritarian parent. Obey me, I'm the boss, you're crying, I'll show you what it means to cry, like some of those things, suck it up, tough it out. So if you have that kind of approach with an intense brain child, not only does it escalate the intensity, but it deepens the neural pathway of fire in the brain, fire in the brain, fire in the brain. And now this becomes this pathway where it starts shaping a kid's personality because of the stress that they're under. Okay, so all that being said, you are not entirely responsible for your child's mood and behaviors. Like, let's say that too, okay? And yet we can still influence it. I know that we as parents and caregivers can go through the negative shame spiral pretty quickly. So know that while I might be sharing some things that are rooted in brain science and like secure attachment, the goal of me being here is to say, can we just talk about this? Because I don't know about you, but when the pediatrician or a neighbor or my sister says, oh, my kid's hard too, and I'm like, wait. But was it like that? Oh, it was like that. It might feel better in the moment, like things are okay and I'm, like okay and doing a good job. But then I wake up the next morning and it happens again. I'm like, well, that kind of just like encouragement is not all I need. I need plans and I need to know what I'm doing wrong and then what I can do differently. So this is where my type A helper, Enneagram 2 personality really comes in. Mm-hmm. So the more we reinforce this pathway of stress at home for whatever reason, we don't know, we're dealing with our own trauma, we're reparenting. How many times does it happen where you're like, man, I wish I could have gotten the things I'm learning about myself now, I wish I had them before I had kids. And we just don't have that information. So grace for that to yourselves and your hearts. But when you reinforce this pathway, what's really interesting is that the scientist in the brain is looking to test boundaries and win. So like somebody who's gambling and their hand's on the slot machine, will I win this time? What if I get louder, more intense, hurtful, destroy? But the thing that they're winning isn't just what we're thinking. They're not just trying to win control. They're not just trying to win more screen time, later bedtime, more sweets. What they're trying to win is an energy match. So when the baseline of intensity in the brain has a lot of cortisol, for those of you high achievers who keep yourselves really busy, you might have, underlying it all, an adrenaline addiction. Even if you're a helper like me, where you're like, I just like stay busy and I help people. Because when your brain has this baseline, it's constantly looking to keep those, like some of that chemistry high, that stress chemistry. So it's kind of like if you drink a shot of espresso in the morning and then you wind down and then you need more espresso, and then after lunch you need some dark chocolate. This is what the scientist is doing. I'm feeling kind of calm. You might notice your child stirs up drama or chaos in the household. It can't just really be low key. And some of that is because what the brain is looking for isn't just will I win, but can I feel safe just from being the same? Can I repeat this pattern? This is what brain science says. Can I maintain homeostasis of stress where we're argumentative and then somebody reacts at a higher level? It's kind of like staying in a job too long just because it's familiar, or in a relationship, even if it's not working for you. So what we want to do once we understand that is we want to say, well, so how do we reverse this? How do we take a totally different path? And this is where the good news comes in. You can walk on a different path, and this starts appearing then like your child can develop a different identity, self-esteem, and self-control. So there's something else in the brain called mirror neurons that's like a mirror that you look in. It reflects the state another person is in. So when we talk about helping kids with challenging behavior, and we say, Kathy will talk about start with you, be where your feet are, get grounded, all of that's really true. And one of the reasons for this is because of mirror neurons. So if we're saying, you can't act like that, and we're trying to get our kid to stop yelling or talking nasty, but then we're doing that because we're triggered and there's fire in our brain, the mirror neurons go, that's how you do it. That's actually how you do it in relationship. I know, a tall order, right? So how do we regain our own control? Well, some of the information that I'm sharing with you now about mirror neurons is that I want to let you off the hook a little bit, okay? When Charlie is melting down over here, not only does how I respond matter, and you know that I'm going to have to respond that way like 100,000 times before he responds that way, right? Like, it takes a long time. But the other thing is his behavior is triggering my mirror neurons, which is why there was a dad I worked with once who said, I was never an angry person until I became an angry dad. Mm-hmm. How much easier, helper personalities, I don't know, for everybody, but how much easier is it for you to respond to a child who's sad or hurt and drop everything versus if they're raging and ticked off? different, right? Because those mirror neurons, I'm like, oh, that's why my blood was boiling and why I felt rage. Now, have I felt that as a parent? Totally. So when you remember about mirror neurons, it starts giving us this understanding of, it's not just about the child specialist who has really cool tools. There are really simple and practical things that you can do with your child, teenager, or young adult as well, so that you're, at least in this relationship, not adding fuel to the fire and matching that intensity. So I want you to consider, take a moment, what does fire look like in your home? And you don't have to tell me, but think about it for yourself, for a child, for a sibling, possibly, for a co-parent, possibly, for another caregiver, possibly. And then where do we start? So we know that there's fire in the home, and let me just scroll through this without putting anybody on the spot. And so fire is going to look like fight behavior. So what does that look like as parents? That's probably pretty obvious. If we talk about flight behavior, that's like walking away, I can't handle this, it's too loud. You might find yourself doing activities outside of the house and trying to escape rather than like building collaborative communication, family situations, because you just need to get out of there. No judgment on that, but that might be some flight behavior. You might have freeze behavior where you feel powerless. Maybe you find your child hurting yourself because you're trying to stay with them and do this like empathetic thing, but then you don't know how to like move this forward because it's not just about empathy. And then we've got fight, flight, freeze. So you get powerless, you might feel helpless, but you might also still feel mad. And then we've got fawn behavior, which is acquiesce. Oh, it's fine. It's not that big of a deal. Just go ahead and do that. So our starting point, to give you something super practical, is this calm mantra. Because of everything you just learned, if your starting point can be a calm body and a calm voice and a calm face, this makes a really big difference in you feeling empowered to know what's my first step. Now, when I lead my 8-module course, I have like a self-paced version online, and then I do a group version where I lead it for 8 weeks paired with twice monthly group coaching over Zoom, so that there's 2 seasons of support that parents get. What they say on the end of program forms is, this is the most important tool that actually shifted their family. Now, if you're kind of skeptical, because you're like, yeah, I've tried calm. And the hang up for us is, I'm calm until. Okay, so there's 8 pillars because I find most families need a combination of 3 to 5, but I don't want to skip the fact that if you're like, well, we're not really yellers in our house. And when I've asked parents in the past when I was working in person, like, well, what do you say when your child doesn't come to dinner? I say, get in here right now. And like fists are clenched and like their face looks really mean. And I'm like, okay, well, usually what you really do at home comes out in coaching sessions. So can I reflect this to you? So we're trying to create a space where we're not adding more of that fight or flight stress with our own reactions. That's a starting point. And then when we can start looking at this from the perspective that really cool child specialists learn, like early childhood educators and a bunch of therapy fields will study behavior and child development in this way. When you can look at this from the perspective of all behavior is communication, this becomes a launch pad to understand, how am I perceiving the behavior? Because how we look at it and how we label it is going to influence how we react. If I know Charlie has fire in the brain, I'm like, okay, well, I do say this in my head, like, I'm a good Midwestern girl. I know how to have campfires and like put out the fire. In myself, I know how to take breaths. But if I start looking at like, man, he's the hardest kid in the school. He's just trying to manipulate the situation and get back to the classroom. He's so defiant. Oh, so defiant. If we start using words like that to ourselves or the young people in our lives, the you language towards young people becomes the inner I language. Right? No shame. Just good to understand. And we can start reversing this and doing something differently. But when you realize that behavior is communication, like Kathy was talking about ADHD and stillness, and I watched a really cool YouTube video of a keynote speaker who was in, I think, second grade, and he's like always tapping things and going to the principal's office. What was his name? Clint Pulver, maybe. And he gets called in after the teacher says, you know what, you need to come see me after school today. And he's like, I'm in trouble again, this little 8-year-old or whatever, 7-year-old. So he goes to the teacher's desk and he goes, you know, the teacher says, I don't think you're a bad kid, I think you're a drummer. And he opens his desk drawers and he gives him drumsticks. And this dude, this Clint guy, like, was part of the Blue Man group, if you've ever heard of those like international, like global phenomenon drumming groups, because this teacher saw him like, your behavior is communication, you can't sit still. I've heard so many stories of parents I work with where we're like, can we put them in karate? Can we put them in dance? Can we find a nature school? Do they need Montessori? Do they need, like there's so many ways that once we understand what's our child, when we can look at what our child, when we can honor what our child is expressing and be creative and thoughtful about how do we meet their needs, now what they're communicating to us is not some of these labels that we think. They have a diagnosis, they have trauma, they have the separation from birth thing if you're fostered or adopted kids, right? Like, okay, their behavior is communication. What is our starting point, even if we don't have a whole team of professionals? Calm body, calm voice, calm face. And noticing that the way that you're communicating is possibly going to add more fuel to the fire. So I really want to give you something practical. So I'm going to take you through an exercise. It's 30 seconds. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes, and I'm going to like verbalize a fire starter. And what I want you to notice, I'll just do it for 20 seconds, is what it feels like inside your body. I'm like super trauma informed, so if you don't want to close your eyes, you don't have to. Just gaze down, and if you have feelings, you can just put them over your heart. I'm not going to scare you, but I'm going to show you how I trigger fire. Okay, so if you're ready. No. Knock it off. Stop that. Oh, every day you do that. No, I said no. Open your eyes. Feel free to do hands on heart. Kathy walks me through neurovascular hold literally every Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. So that's a good one too. So starting phrases with no is a fire starter. There's usually 4 common reactions to starting phrases with no. What did you notice in your body? We'll have 3 in this room, I bet. Did you want to share?
I just kind of like clenched, like, oh.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah, clench, and you kind of even startled backwards like that. Uh-huh. Yeah, got it. Thank you. That's okay. What else did you notice? That's different.
I'm not going to let this work on me.
Oh. Uh-huh. So, got it. So you had defiance. You had resistance. Thank you. What else? Just doing mom stuff up here.
I didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah. I didn't do anything wrong. I oftentimes hear that from individuals who I can really relate to because I'm a pleaser by nature. Because we're like, I'm not a bad person. Why am I getting in trouble? I don't know if you have a pleaser personality or not. But what else did you notice?
Shift in energy.
Yeah, like not as bubbly as when I first started, right? Yeah. Anything different? Okay, so tension in your body. Raise your hand if you had tension. Where was it? Where was your chest? Raise your hand if you're chest tension. Shoulder tension. Yeah, neck and shoulders. Belly tension. Yes, sacrum, like tuck your tail under. Yeah, so that's one really common one. So some sort of tension in your body. The other is for harmonious or pleaser personality types, that's sadness, where we kind of wilt. We're like, oh, and I see this with kids as little as 5, as they come home and they've been continuously getting in trouble at school for whatever social thing they're not doing or academic thing. And you'll say, well, why did you get that bad color on the behavior chart? And they'll say, I'm just a bad kid. Do we see this thing about teenagers too? Like, do we see this with the kids where we're like, oh, they're wilting again. Somebody's like not really lifting them up. They're seeing that something's not working in their life. Resistance. So Julie, that might have been resistance for you. It might have also been the last one where you're like tuning me out. But resistance is more of that fight response, or like, don't tell me what to do, or I didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes resistance folks are more comfortable with conflict than the previous ones. Judy's nodding vigorously. Okay, good. And then tuning out. So we often think about this with teenagers because in that stage of autonomy, that's a really it's a traditional and typical developmental phase to develop autonomy and pull away from parents. But I've also seen this. I have family members that were in a pretty traumatic home environment, and I'd go and care for the 2-3-year-olds, and I'd be like, okay, 2 kids, I'd come and eat dinner, and kid A would come running, and kid B would be coloring. And I'm like using all my skills, like, okay, I'm gonna go get him. So I'm gonna use like my touch cue and my visual cue and like let him hear me again. And I'd be like, all right, time to eat, your brother is waiting. And he'd just be like, tune me out. And so that was his protection mechanism to adapt to the environment that was really stressful for him at home. So isn't that interesting that none of you did anything wrong, and I'm a fairly nice person, that like I was able to trigger that in you? And there's so many variations of no. Your tone, we're not doing that, depending on if we're at that phase where we're talking back to our kids or not yet. And when you understand this, one of the really important things to recognize is that there's not judgment that this is happening, but you want to know it if you're trying to improve the bond and trust factor in your relationship so that there's better listening, so that your child is more open to longer processing conversations with you. And there was a study that came out, 10, 15 years ago that said, by the time children are toddlers, they hear the word no every 9 minutes.
Oh boy.
Right? But here's the thing, right? We're all groaning, but at the same time, for those of you with the little, raise your hand if you have like a birth to 5-year-old at home. Okay, so a few of you. It makes sense because you're like, well, what do these chairs look like? I'm looking for the spinning chair where you're like, no, the kid's on the spinning chair. So you're gonna be like, no, not safe. And they're like walking over here for these cords and then so to me, it makes sense at these young ages that we're saying no. But the kids who have poor self-control, high impulsivity and energy and distractibility, we neglect to fade our stern directives. Starting phrases with kids' names is also something that happens. If you've ever heard a kid say, Mom, 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 14 times in 11 seconds somehow, can that even happen? But it does. You know how frustrating that is. And we tend to do that. I would be like, Charlie, come on, let's go. Charlie, let's walk through the hall. Charlie, remember to close the door. Charlie, here's what we're doing today. Starting phrases with kids' names as well is like trying to command their attention. There's this little bit like, ooh, you're calling me again. So what I'm trying to teach you is like, what's our starting point to calm fire in the brain? Now I actually teach 11 fire starter behaviors that we unintentionally trip on. It's a free PDF on my website. I like these QR codes, so I'm happy to give it to you at the end of the talk, but I'll just keep talking for now until we move our way through that. Okay, so third tool that I want to share with you today. So we've got calm the fire, we've got avoid the fire starters, and then there's this other component of understanding where are kids really when they're processing, what are they processing when they're having big outbursts and big feelings? What does Dr. Becky Kennedy call these kids? Deeply feeling kids or highly sensitive kids. What's happening is, or what you want to understand is you want to understand that Dr. Daniel Siegel also talks about the right brain and the left brain. Dr. Bruce Perry, who's a specialist in trauma, also talks about this. So the right brain is responsible for emotions. So if Charlie is melting down here and he's having big feelings, if I respond where I'm naturally going to, because my brain is fully developed, I'm going to use my left brain. I'm going to respond with logic and language. So here's where, as a parent, you might say something like, I know you're really mad, but you can't hit. That's not safe. We're trying to do dinner. And remember, we're going to do something fun afterwards. We've talked about this a million times. If you do this, what's going to happen at school? And eventually, we think they're going to end up in jail. So knowing that kids age 0 to 3 in particular experience the world emotionally. I'm hungry, I'm tired, I'm wet, that's mine, which is why we start trying to teach no grabbing and sharing and asking and things like that. but they're not good at it yet. Do you know how old we are when our two brain hemispheres are integrated? Good. 25, yeah, or more. So they used to, 15 years ago, they said 25 to 28. Now they're saying like into early 30. So, it does. Yeah, it does. I don't know specifically, but it's going to be in that 25 to 30-ish. That might be why they bumped it to 30. Okay. So if your child has fire in the brain and they're stuck emotionally, what I want you to know is that our tendency is going to be in our left brain and not cross the bridge over to where they're at emotionally. And this is a super powerful strategy. Let me think if I'm going to share. Yes, okay. So it can be really tricky when you say, well, I have a precocious 4-year-old. Somebody just said this to me. My 4-year-old hits their sibling, and then when I say take a break, my 4-year-old smirks at me, and after the break they go and hit the sibling again. And I'm like, okay, well, what were you thinking? What were you expecting? And she's like, well, you know I've raised 5 kids, and I'm raising my 3 other grandkids alongside my 4-year-old, so I'm expecting that she knows, because she does know. I'm like, I mean, she kind of knows, but she can't access it, just like the teenagers who are in this big pruning stage and they can't access their reasoning skills in many situations. So if you feel like I have a 9-year-old, I have an 11-year-old, I have a 17-year-old, I have a 24-year-old, and we've been working on these skills of understanding don't react with your emotions, well, aren't we all still learning not to react with our emotions? And some of our brains are fully developed. I can't make age comparisons anymore. I have no idea after 40. So let me share what we know. Well, let's just look at these different communication styles right here. And notice who might be more right brain and who's more left brain. I just go like this.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me. And I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head. And it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep?
So friends who are listening to the replay of this afterwards, please know that if you go to YouTube and look for it, it's not the nail, you'll find that. It's pretty top of the list. So you notice different communication styles, kind of gender specific in this video. It's dating right now. But what we know is that if you can connect a child to their own emotions, it connects them to you, right? So in that situation, you saw him say like, well, what if it's, okay, I see, it's really hard. I always laugh about this video because I got married 10 years ago and my husband's a really gentle personality, 5'9", brunette, grew up golfing on his own in rural Wisconsin as his pastime. And so when we got married, I'm like, oh, this isn't going to be like the chaos of growing up in my household of 7 people. So we get married and he moves into my condo and he comes home one day and I'm cutting vegetables on the cutting board we got from our wedding. And like celery and carrots flying, and he walks in, and I've got pretty high affect, and so he walks in and he's like, whoa, tough day? And I was like, yeah, I had a really tough day. And I go back to chopping, and he says, and actually I look over at him, like, he's walked in the room. Is he going to say something? And so he's like scanning the room. What am I supposed to say next? And he goes, he did this with his finger and gave me permission to tell the story. He goes, buck up. Tomorrow's a new day. Really? That was not a good night for us. So I found a book about different communication styles, and we would walk around Lake of the Isles on the weekend, and I would have my printout, like, here's, like, I'm a processor, and you're not supposed to do, like, the Mr. Fix-It thing. And so we would practice, and I'd sound like I was ranting about something, and he'd go like, okay, how's she feeling? And he'd be like, you're mad. I'm like, I'm not mad, I'm worrying about this. And what we found in our relationship was when I sound mad, I'm actually really worried and get overwhelmed easily. As a teenager in high school, I had such bad anxiety before 10th grade, I would actually black out in the kitchen. So I'd like put my bread in the toaster, and then I'd lay down with my cheek on the living room soft carpet and put my body on the 1970s linoleum. And then within about 10 minutes or so, the lights would just somehow come on. I could hear my dad listening to the radio and sipping his coffee in the living room. And then I'd, get up and put peanut butter on my now cold toast and wash it down with a glass of milk, and we would drive to school for driving practice. So I'm familiar with these feelings, or like this really crippling anxiety. And I had asked this is kind of a side note, but I was asked to do a TED Talk for Minnesota Children's Mental Health in 2019. So I was going to use this story about anxiety when I was growing up and the process of that. And I talked to my dad, because I was like, you know what, Dad, I've been really thinking about this a long time. Why didn't you say anything when I would black out? And he was like, you blacked out? Remember, I would like lay on the floor. He's like, well, you had 3 older siblings. I thought you were just a tired teenager. And I didn't know to say anything. But he missed seeing me. And so with my husband, Ty, we've practiced, how do you see me? I'm a really verbal person as well. It's like love language, right? How do you see and connect with somebody? And the brain science says when you connect a child to their emotions, it connects them to you. So how do you do this in real life with kids? Well, it's not that different than how we do it, how I do it with my partner, which is, I remember a couple weeks later after practicing the strategy I talked about, and that I'm encouraging you to use here, where he came home and I'm in front of my stainless steel wok, and like veggies are flying and I'm making a ruckus, and it looks similar. He goes, whoa, tough day. And I said, yeah. And he scans the room. What am I supposed to say next? And he comes over to me and he puts his hand on my shoulder and he said, I can tell you look really upset. And how do I respond? Oh, I am. I'm so upset. And I have to recall all of the bad things that happened in my business startup phase that day, not to mention the bad dream I had about him the night before that I was holding him accountable to. But what happens is when Dr. Daniel Siegel says you name it to tame it. When you label and recognize a child, an adolescent, a young adult, an adult's emotions, the brain goes, you see me and you hear me. So for kids, if we're trying to strengthen bond or turn down the volume on challenging behaviors, this is how you do it. They feel seen and heard. Does it work instantly? No. Are there nuances? Totally. Because there are some kids where you say, you look really upset, and they're like, stop saying that! Or, you've got a little kid and you're like, yeah, I can tell how mad you are, and they're like still trying to come at you and like hit you, right? So little kid or big kid, I don't, it happens across the board. So understanding that this is a key component where you can really influence your child's brain and calm some of that fight or flight stress by noticing how to label their feelings in a way that works for them. This is not usually the tool that parents say was their favorite on the feedback form, because this is where the most intentionality comes into play. Because how many of you, like honestly, raise your hand if you were raised in a family where your grown-up acknowledged your feelings pretty well? A couple, a few, yeah. So in a room this size, less than 10, I can't do math fast, okay. So, so 3 people raised their hands. So what does that mean? This, buzzwords like reparenting are kind of funny to me, but I also get it. when you are working through your child's feelings, it's not just you and your kid's feelings in the room, but it's you with those feelings too. So that's why it's so hard. And it might be where you grab a smattering of ideas from conferences or Instagram or articles or podcasts, and you're like, it's not working. Well, I found for me, it's because we don't have the whole plan of how do we calm fire from the downstairs up and use our own mirror neurons to influence our kids' behavior, and then build more happy chemicals. And then after that point, if you look at your 8 pillars handout, then it doesn't say 1 through 8 here, but it's towards the bottom that we start looking at positive discipline and social skills and conflict resolution. If we start there at discipline, I can't tell you how many parents say, I think I just need firmer discipline. Like, that's probably the last thing that you need. There becomes less need for discipline when you're using some of these other strategies that are rooted in brain science and secure attachment and relationship building. So I really want to just take a moment to speak to the caregivers with the older kids in the room, so teenagers and young adults, to say it's still true. Like, you asked, should I be in this class or not? And the same thing is true where we fall into this trap of a teenager asking us for advice and possibly calling us or not asking for advice, and we overteach with logic. We talk to them and talk to them and talk to them. Instead, I want you to ask yourself, how is this person feeling? And attempt to validate it. And this isn't like, how are you feeling? You don't have to do the therapy thing where you're trying to help them understand or come up with an emotion word. It's you knowing emotion words. And for kids who are for individuals, adults, young adults who are upset, it's a pretty safe bet to acknowledge frustrated, upset, unfair. I would really write those words down. If you acknowledge these things, I can hear how upset you are. How are they going to respond? Well, for some of us, feel afraid of our child, however old they are, their reaction. Well, then they're going to get really mad, and then they're going to blame me, and they're going to attack me, and it's always my fault. Yeah, intense brain kids do that. It's hard for them to take responsibility. These big feelings are hard to be with. So when you start with calm body, voice, and face, and you do start opening that door, my recommendation is you acknowledge that does sound really that sounds unfair. They're going to do what I did that my husband was afraid of, where they're going to keep emoting. And Ross Greene, author of The Explosive Child, says an empathy conversation on average lasts 12 to 15 minutes. So we might be doing that smattering, like, oh, that was a good reel. I should remember to say, like, you're upset. Yeah, I can tell you're frustrated. And here I'm labeling it. I'm not asking them. I don't care how old they are. I hear that you're this. It seems like you're this. I'm noticing, is it that you're something like that, to lead the way in. And how often do you spend that much time letting your kid process through their feelings? And for those of you who are like, yeah, but what do I do next? I mean, that's part of the whole curriculum, to learn the 3 to 5 things so you know what to do next. But this is the long-term strategy that usually takes a good 60 days for grown-ups to get good at, which is why I offer my community so that there's like check-in calls every week or every 2 weeks to say, what are you celebrating? What was hard? Let's talk through it, so that we start transforming ourselves instead of just trying to have our kids fix themselves. We have so much influence. I have 5 more minutes. So I know I said I would tell you my despair story. So when my kid was born in August of 2020, after 30 hours of labor, we had actually planned I don't want to give this away. We'd actually planned a home birth with a midwife and a doula. I said my husband's a chiropractor, so we're a pretty crunchy family. And it happened successfully after 30 hours of posterior labor. And when my kid was born, what the midwives told me later was the first cry he made was a pain cry. And it was this shrieking, stomach churning, sour stomach feeling that I would get when he cried from that moment on until it took 10 months before I, as a certified parent coach, actually heard myself say to somebody, I enjoy parenting my kid. And what ended up happening was he dropped weight really quickly. In the first 2 weeks of life, he went from the 86th percentile to the 10th. And the midwives and lactation consultants who were visiting us would say, you got to get on this. And we're like trying to avoid hospitals at that time of COVID. And I'm in despair. It's 3 a.m. I'm looking up Facebook groups and how do I get my kid to latch and not lose weight and survive and thrive. And also what had happened was 5 weeks before giving birth, I'd fallen down some stairs, protected my belly, but broke my ankle. So I was on crutches. So I've got this newborn at home, and a lactation consultant came to my house. She was the fourth one. She had 4 special needs kids of her own at home, worked 12-hour shifts at Regions Hospital. And she came in and she looked at what I was doing with nursing and she said, okay, I know you've got some good tools and people have good information. She looks next to my bed. And like this crutch, like I want you to lean on me and I'm going to impart my knowledge and my wisdom until you can do it. I believe in you. I can't do it for you, but I will empower you. Her name is Liz. And I share this story because in terms of despair, this was Liz working on my baby, doing some craniosacral, and there were a bunch of things that happened: posterior tongue tie, trouble with latch, food sensitivities. He'd broken his collarbone immediately at birth. He was a little crooked, so his head bones were overlapping, so we had to do a lot of work so that he wasn't having infant headaches around the clock. And now, here's where we are. We're thriving. And my tools, do I put them to use most days? Yeah. Does it get easier? You know what? At 4 and some months, it actually is starting to get easier. And my story is not your story at all, right? But there's components where I want to empower you and say, thank goodness for my mother who said, every child has gifts. You can learn to draw them out. Can it be painful? Oh, it can be painful. Can it be heartbreaking? Yeah. Do you get compassion fatigue? Totally. Do we need to develop our own grounding and tools and community? Yeah, all of those things are necessary. So what you have is I wanted to gift you with this magnet, this calm body, calm voice, calm face. If you don't have one, grab one on the way out. And if this was practical for you and it gives you some good reminders today, awesome. I meant for it to be practical. And because I keynote nationally around North America, I also know that people wonder usually, what can I do to make a difference in my kid's life? So if you are interested in learning more about a parenting program, you can come up here. There's a workbook. I brought 10 today. We've got like this special if you wanted to sign up, but I'll also go downstairs if you wanted to talk to me there. So there are resources out there if you feel like you need a tender space for you as a parent. I am going to share one more thing before I wrap up, and that is because I keynote at youth mental health conferences nationally, it's super helpful for me to receive feedback. This is different than today's conference feedback. If you're willing to do that, it takes 2 minutes. You would do this QR code and type in calm. And then what happens is at the end of taking this, it's like 90 seconds, it will send you, it will give you the link to get the 11 reasons that emotionally intense kids act out. It's like one of the best ways, if you found this valuable, to say thank you back to me, because then I can use that information and work on things that maybe you want more of or weren't as helpful to you. So type in calm. And as you kind of pull that up, I'll then wrap up to be on time, and then you can stick around if you want to fill that out and talk about this parent workbook. So in closing, I haven't had a pet. I haven't had an animal in my house I'm 42. I moved out when I was 18. I don't know how many years that is. I'm not that good at math. Okay, more than 20 years. So I haven't had an animal in my house for 20 years, but I so fondly remember the story of my first pet. We got a call from the kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Marinoff, one day in the springtime. And, my mom, us kids would always pray that my mom would answer. The phone would ring when she was yelling at us, because she would always be like, hello, this is Cheryl. So a phone call comes in, my mom says that, and oh, hi, Mrs. Marinoff. Wait, what's that? Okay, let me take Sammy across the street. I'll come to the kindergarten classroom right now. So it was a Friday afternoon, And we walked across the street to Ella Jacob Elementary in Coon Rapids, here in Minnesota. And Mrs. Marinoff said the janitor was looking at these frozen duck eggs that we were going to use for our classroom experiment or experience. And one of them wasn't frozen on the way here. He peeled back the little egg because it felt warm, and there's this little duckling inside it. Would your family take this duck home and care for it? So we put Webby in a little cardboard box and walked her home. I think it was a boy duck. Oh yeah, it was boy. Okay, anyway, so we walked Webby home, and my dad helped set up a lamp over the box on the double sink upstairs in the bathroom. And my mom put a medicine dropper next to the box. And when I would wake up as a 6-year-old, I had a lot of nightmares. So in our family, she guided me to wake her up by touching her feet, not her head. Wake her up by touching her feet. She'd take me potty, take a drink of water. She'd do a prayer with me. And then she'd hand me the medicine dropper and she'd say, give Webby 10 drops. And I'd go drip, drip, drip. And you couldn't see the changes on a daily basis, but over time it really added up where Webby got strong enough to hold up her head. And my dad built a big cage in our suburban backyard that had no fencing. And Webby would run around the yard with the 4 other children all summer long, quacking obnoxiously. Quack, 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 quack. And on the days that I would nap, my mom says that she vividly remembers I'd come out of my bedroom and I'd come outside and it's like really super bright and my hair would be sticking up and I'd be rubbing my eyes and Webby would get right behind me like a puppy and her quack would change. Quack, 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 quack. And you know, kids are like ducklings, where you're wondering about the strategies you're using, their teachers are using, another parent or caregiver is using. And if that person's not in the room today, to answer your question, is it worth it to do some of these strategies in the face of all of that adversity? Absolutely. Your relationship with your kid matters. And you can shift it, and they can imprint differently on you in terms of their listening and their collaboration skills. So like Webby, this is a true picture. Webby grew that big, and we got to drop him off at the farm. Like he thrived. So if there's anything you take away, if we're looking for encouragement too, it's that I know things are hard in families. I know it. Can you make it better? Yeah, you can make it better. Thanks for your time. Yeah. You're welcome. You're welcome.